So imagine being told that the lunch you are eating right now isn't just, feeding your stomach.
Right.
Like, imagine it is actively rewriting your moral character, that the physical food sitting on your plate is literally systematically dismantling your willpower,
Mm.
altering your patience, and, well, basically defining your fundamental ability to endure hardship.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like some sort of aggressive exaggeration.
Yeah.
Or, maybe one of those fringe modern wellness trends you see on TikTok or something.
Totally.
But this is actually the central premise of a text written more than 600 years ago.
Exactly.
Mm.
And welcome to today's deep dive. We are exploring a really highly focused, honestly deeply challenging excerpt from the Muqaddimah, which was written by the 14th century scholar Ibn Khaldun.
A truly brilliant work.
It really is. And our mission today, for you listening, is to look at this framework that completely reimagines the relationship between what we put on our plates and who we actually are as people.
Mm-hmm.
We're taking diet out of the realm of just, calories and nutrition and placing it directly at the center of human behavior.
And sociology, really. What makes this particular excerpt so compelling is how Khaldun observes causality. Because, I mean, we all accept the modern scientific consensus that food affects physical health.
Sure, yeah, like the mind-gut connection.
Exactly. We are generally familiar with that modern concept, the idea that your microbiome might influence your mood or just make you feel sluggish after a big meal. But Khaldun goes much, much further.
He takes a massive leap.
He really does. He argues that food and environmental luxury are the actual foundational building blocks of your literal character.
Okay, let's unpack this, because I really want to focus on the mechanics of that claim. It is so easy to look back at a 14th century text and just, dismiss it.
Oh, for sure. People do it all the time.
Right, like saying, well, they didn't understand macronutrients or like cellular biology back then.
Yeah.
But he's essentially looking right past the biology to observe the psychological outcomes of consumption. It's like in the modern view, we treat food simply as putting gas in a car, just fuel. But Khaldun's view treats food more like software code.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right, like it actually programs human behavior. But how did he actually believe a physical piece of food could alter a non-physical trait, like willpower? Like, what's the actual mechanism he is proposing here?
Well, so the mechanism is really rooted in the body's response to friction, or I guess more accurately, the lack of friction.
Okay.
Khaldun suggests that human beings are fundamentally shaped by their environment and their sustenance. So when you ingest a diet that is characterized by really rich, complex, and overly abundant foods, you are not just processing calories.
We're doing something else.
Yeah, you are actually signaling to your biological and psychological systems that the struggle for survival is effectively over.
Wow. So the body receives this signal of absolute satiation, and it just responds by, what? Powering down, like turning off the internal machinery that generates drive.
Precisely. If we look at the historical context of the text,
Yeah.
Khaldun wasn't looking at food through a microscope, obviously. He was looking at it through the lens of human struggle.
Right, the daily grind of staying alive back then.
Exactly. To him, the act of biological survival required a certain sharpness, a sharpness of the mind and the spirit. So when a person is constantly full, when their diet is heavy and luxurious, that physical heaviness mirrors a psychological heaviness.
Because the body doesn't need to be alert anymore.
Right, so the mind loses its edge. The connection isn't just chemical, which is what we focus on today. It is deeply behavioral.
That fundamentally changes how we view the act of eating. I mean, think about it. For you listening, think about your own life for a second. Have you ever noticed a shift in your own personality, or maybe your patience levels, based simply on how you've been eating over a given week?
It's a really confronting question to ask yourself.
It is, because we tend to view our daily consumption very passively. We eat a massive, heavy meal, we feel tired, we call it a food coma, and we just assume, well, the effects are going to pass once digestion is over.
Just a temporary state.
Right. But Khaldun is arguing that this isn't temporary at all. If you live in a constant cycle of overabundance, you are permanently altering your baseline temperament.
He essentially removes that imaginary boundary we've drawn between physical input and emotional output. If your daily baseline is excessive consumption, your behavioral baseline literally shifts toward lethargy.
So back to the car analogy, you aren't just putting different fuel into a machine, you are fundamentally changing the nature of the machine itself.
You're swapping out the engine for a worse one.
Yeah. But okay, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment here, because we have to look at this through the lens of our modern era.
Sure.
Khaldun specifically points to, quote, excessive luxury and overeating as the catalysts for this decline. But in the world you and I live in today, luxury is literally the explicitly stated goal of human labor. It's the whole point of the rat race.
Exactly. We work 60-hour weeks. We take on massive amounts of stress, specifically so we can achieve a state of comfort. We want the fully stocked fridge. We want the rich meals. We want the totally frictionless weekend where we don't have to lift a finger.
Yeah, the dream.
Right, the dream. So are we supposed to believe that the ultimate reward for our hard work is actually just a trap? Like a trap that destroys us?
What's fascinating here is that, according to the Muqaddimah, yes, it is the ultimate trap. Wow. Because modern culture tends to conflate temporary biological rest with long-term psychological fulfillment. Khaldun's formula links excessive luxury and overabundance directly to deeply negative psychological outcomes.
Spells it out on the text.
He absolutely does. He observes that when individuals achieve this state of constant comfort and rich diets, they become inclined toward laziness, lethargy, and this is the critical phrase he uses here, a weakness of will.
Weakness of will. That's a very specific, almost moral judgment.
Yeah. It implies something much deeper than just, feeling unmotivated on a Sunday afternoon because you ate too many pancakes.
It is entirely different from simple fatigue. I mean, fatigue is just a depletion of physical energy, right?
Yeah.
You sleep, it's restored.
Right.
But weakness of will is an erosion of personal agency. It is the loss of your internal determination. When Khaldun talks about a weak will, he is describing a person who has completely lost the capacity to push through discomfort.
Because they never have to practice pushing through discomfort.
Exactly.
Like if your environment is perfectly climate controlled and your diet consists of highly caloric, instantly available, luxurious food, your willpower has literally no terrain to practice on.
That is the absolute core of his argument. Right. Willpower is the ability to resist short-term gratification in pursuit of long-term goals, or, to endure present hardship for future survival.
So muscle.
Right. And a diet of luxury systematically eliminates all hardship. When you are constantly satiated, getting exactly what you want the very moment you want it, your will is never called upon to exert itself. So, just like any unused biological system, it atrophies.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because it makes me think of metallurgy.
Oh.
Like tempering steel. You don't make a piece of steel stronger by keeping it wrapped in velvet at a comfortable room temperature.
No, definitely not.
Right. You have to subject it to intense heat.
Yeah.
And then rapid cooling. You have to intentionally introduce extreme stress and friction into the process.
Right. The shock is what hardens it.
Exactly. That environmental stress is what aligns the molecular structure and makes the steel unbreakable. If you remove the friction, you are left with a metal that is soft, malleable, and just completely unable to hold an edge.
I like that analogy so much more than the typical, building a muscle at the gym comparison.
Gym one gets overused.
It does. And tempering implies a permanent structural change in the material's nature, which is exactly what Khaldun is describing here. He is arguing that luxury leaves the human spirit soft and malleable.
It loses its edge.
Yes. The lethargy he describes isn't just about lying on a couch watching TV. It is a lethargy of the spirit. It's a fundamental reluctance to engage with anything difficult whatsoever.
Which means that by succeeding in our modern pursuit of absolute comfort, we are actively dismantling the very internal drive that probably fueled our success in the first place.
That's the paradox. We're trading our agency for our comfort. And the text is uncompromising on this point. Overindulgence doesn't just soften the waistline, it actually corrupts the character.
But wait, if excessive luxury and overeating are the poison that weakens the steel, what is Khaldun's antidote?
Wow.
I mean, he can't possibly expect people to just intentionally starve themselves just to maintain their willpower, right? What does the opposite side of his equation actually look like?
No, he doesn't advocate for starvation, or even extreme asceticism, like moving to a cave. The antidote he outlines in the text is what he calls a simple life and moderate austerity.
Moderate austerity. That word moderate is doing a lot of heavy lifting right there.
It is the defining word of the whole concept.
Yeah.
Taking your tempering analogy from earlier, if you apply too much heat to the steel, it just melts. It's destroyed.
Right.
Extreme deprivation destroys the body and the mind in the same way. But moderate austerity is the precise, intentional application of dietary and environmental friction.
So it's a choice.
Yes, it is having the means to indulge, but consciously choosing restraint.
It's a curated friction. It's the deliberate choice to, say no to the third helping, or to choose a simple meal over a complex, really rich one, or honestly, just simply allowing yourself to feel a mild sense of hunger for a few hours without immediately rushing to extinguish it with a snack.
Yeah, it is the daily, repeated practice of withholding. And Khaldun lists the specific psychological benefits that emerge from this practice.
What does he list?
He says that a lifestyle of moderate austerity and a simple diet is directly linked to the production of strength, patience, and endurance.
So the causal link he's making is that physical restraint at the dinner table directly translates into mental endurance in the broader scope of life.
Because every single time you practice moderate austerity, you are essentially proving to your own nervous system that you can withstand discomfort and that you'll survive. You are microdosing hardship.
Microdosing hardship. I love that.
And then, when a real profound challenge arrives in your life, say a huge crisis at work, a sudden tragedy, some massive obstacle, your will is already tempered.
You're ready for it.
You have patience because your baseline state is not one of instant gratification. You have endurance because you are not reliant on constant heavy satiation just to function.
You have basically built a psychological callus, and you've built it through your daily diet. It is such a fascinating way to look at something as mundane as, like, Tuesday's dinner. We're talking about the foundational building blocks of human resilience here.
We really are.
But Khaldun doesn't leave this theory at the individual level, does he? Because the Muqaddimah is primarily a sociological text. He scales this entire concept up to observe the rise and fall of whole populations.
He does. And this is where his theory transitions from, personal self-help to a grand, unified theory of civilization.
It's mind-blowing.
He applies this behavioral math to entire societies, arguing that environment and diet actively contribute to shaping the morals of societies and their entire way of living.
That is just a staggering claim, the idea that the collective diet of a population determines its moral compass.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, to really understand how he arrives at this, we have to look at the historical comparisons he was making back in the 14th century.
Okay, set the scene for us.
Khaldun spent his life observing the stark contrast between two very different groups of people. On one hand, you had the nomadic Bedouin tribes of the desert, and on the other, the settled, wealthy inhabitants of the cities.
And their environments could not have been more different, obviously.
Exactly. The nomadic tribes lived in a harsh, completely unforgiving environment. Their diet was incredibly sparse, simple, and very often scarce.
So a life of forced austerity.
Yes, forced, but consistent. And Khaldun observed that these people, as a direct result of this simple diet and tough environment, were fiercely independent, they were courageous, and they possessed incredibly strong communal morals and willpower.
Because they had to.
Exactly. They had to rely on themselves for defense and survival, which forged this incredible collective resilience.
While on the other side of the spectrum, you have the city dwellers.
Right. The city dwellers lived in environments defined by heavy agriculture, abundant markets, complex culinary traditions, and a lot of physical comfort.
The ultimate 14th century luxury.
Yeah. They ate rich foods and lived very sedentary lives. And Khaldun noted that these societies inevitably became docile. They lost their collective courage. They became completely reliant on mercenaries for defense and on external authorities for their safety. Their abundance bred a collective weakness of will, which led to moral corruption and eventually the total collapse of their civilization.
It fundamentally upends how we usually think about societal progress.
It really does.
Because we tend to think that a society's morals are formed top-down, right, by its legal frameworks or its constitutions or its religious institutions. But Khaldun is arguing a purely bottom-up perspective here.
Right. The laws are an afterthought.
Yeah, he's saying that laws and philosophies are secondary. The actual bedrock of a society's moral fortitude is the cumulative effect of its daily dietary habits and its relationship to comfort.
Because if the individuals comprising a society are physically and psychologically programmed for luxury, the society as a whole is going to exhibit lethargy.
Makes perfect sense.
When a culture like that is faced with a crisis, their moral decisions will be driven entirely by a desperate desire to maintain their comfort, rather than a willingness to endure temporary hardship for the greater good. They will, quite literally, compromise their values just to keep the granaries full.
Because they lack the cultural endurance. The collective will of the people is simply too soft to uphold the strong laws they might have written in the past.
Exactly. Conversely, a society rooted in a simple life and moderate austerity will collectively exhibit the patience required to navigate long-term challenges.
It bleeds into everything.
It does. Their diplomacy, their reaction to scarcity, how they treat their neighbors, their entire way of living is an emergent property of their restrained consumption.
It is so strange to think that such an old text could feel so aggressively relevant to the present moment.
Yeah, it feels like it was written yesterday.
So what does this all mean? That we've journeyed through this 600-year-old framework that essentially argues your diet and your environment are actively forging your character. It strips away that comforting modern illusion that eating is just a math problem of, calories in and calories out.
Right.
And it replaces it with the reality that every choice you make at the table is tempering the steel of your own willpower.
Which is why the practical application of this knowledge requires you, the listener, to honestly examine your own routines. Are your daily choices leaning heavily toward the excessive luxury that breeds lethargy?
Uncomfortable question.
Very. Or are you finding ways to intentionally introduce the moderate austerity that builds profound internal endurance? It really requires moving the act of eating from just a passive biological chore to an active, conscious practice of character building.
But, beyond the individual choices we make in our own kitchens, there is a much larger, frankly more unsettling question that this text forces us to confront. And it's the thought we really want to leave you with today.
We want you to take Ibn Khaldun's 14th century formula and just overlay it onto the reality of the 21st century.
Because we live in an era defined by extreme convenience. We have global food supply chains. We have algorithmic delivery apps that bring high-calorie meals right to our doors in minutes. And we have climate-controlled environments that ensure we almost never have to feel physical discomfort.
We live in the ultimate frictionless environment.
So if Khaldun is right, if endless comfort and abundant, rich diets truly dictate the willpower and the moral fortitude of a society, what does our modern, frictionless world mean for our collective future? Are we currently mass-producing a society-wide weakness of will? And if so, how do we find the courage to reintroduce the friction our character desperately needs to survive?